It's a little bit like people, in some of the most primitive languages in the world, there's only a couple of numbers. There's 0, there's 1, maybe there's 2 or 3, and then there's no more numbers. Well, our minds are still very primitive in dealing with probabilities. So it's like there's only 3 probabilities. Can't happen, maybe, and will happen. Okay. So I think airline flight insurance is an example of trying to manipulate this personality characteristic. So it means that they'll capture all the people who exaggerate it, right? They used to have vending machines outside of airlines. The vending machines would encourage you to buy just for this flight. As you're getting, they put it right there when you're getting on the flight. And so that's when you're most nervous, if you're one of these people who's up here. And of course, most people don't buy, but they don't have to sell it to everybody. They just sell it to these people, and they charge an outrageous price. But I haven't seen these vending machines anymore. This is interesting. Economists wrote about them 30 or 40 years ago, and they used to be everywhere, and they just kind of disappeared. Do you ever see one of these? I think they're gone. Why is that? Well, somehow we get past things like that. And so it's not like Kahneman and Tversky are immutable, representing immutable errors. These are errors that you naturally happen, but you can get past it, and you end up wanting to deal with people you trust. So you see some vending machine at the airport, and you think, well, my insurance agent isn't recommending I get this, and I've got some kind of insurance. So you walk past it. There's a professor in Germany at the Max Planck Institute in Berlin, Gerd Gigerenzer, who has been taking on Kahneman and Tversky and saying that they're right that people show these tendencies for errors, but I can train people out of them with no problem. Those errors, I just tell them this is an error, teach them then, and they don't do it anymore. Gary Gorton just did a seminar here on errors that people make in financial. Nick Barbaras here on SOM, and he was using Caltech students and found that and tested their ability to prevent certain kind of errors like this, and he found that even the Caltech students made these errors just horribly. We were wondering, aren't they supposed to be bright? Those are young math geniuses. But about a third of them got everything right. So I'm thinking, they're only undergraduates, right? By the time they get along, if they go, they'll eventually be trained out of these errors. But right now, they're behaving just like behavioral finance says it will. So anyway, I think that you will find that prospect theory explains a lot of things that go on in finance, but it doesn't explain everything. And let me move on. I want to talk about let me see, what do I... Well, I have so many things to tell you about here, and I'm thinking about my time. It's a huge field, behavioral finance. Let me mention a few other things. Regret theory is a theory that it's kind of related to Kahneman and Tversky. It says that people fear the pain of regret. There's an old expression, I was kicking myself because I made some bad decision. Well, that's a painful experience. When you did something wrong, this is represented somewhat in the kink in the prospect theory value function. But regret theory says that there's actually a painful emotion that you're wired not to like to have made a mistake. And so then you end up designing your life around that and trying to avoid doing anything that you might regret later. And it can create problems. You may make bad decisions because you're overly worried about regret. Gambling behavior. Anthropologists have reported that gambling occurs in every human society. And so it's one of the human universals. Not that everyone does it, but in every society you'll find people that do it. I have a 1974 study. I found that 61% of U.S. adults actually gambled at least once for money in that year. I bet it has gone up. There's more opportunities for gambling, and it's gone up. 1.1% of men are compulsive gamblers, and 0.5% of women. This is another male trait. Somehow men are more vulnerable to compulsive gambling than women, but it's only a factor of 2 to 1. But it's an addiction that happens that distorts people's thinking. And it's such an addiction that we have an organization called Gamblers Anonymous that helps people with this. It ruins people's lives. People end up getting a divorce because you can't stay with someone, married to someone who is squandering the family money. They do it. They end up sneaking around to gamble, like drinkers sneak around for the next drink. It's gambling behavior is it seems to be associated psychologically with a self-image, a sense of who I am and why I'm an important and good person, a sense of competence. Most gamblers do things that they think are revealing of their competence, and they tend to pick a certain form of gambling that they become psychologically identified with, and they avoid any other form of gambling. Gambling behavior is part of what goes on in the stock market. Certain people who have a personality which makes them particularly interested in gambling find that a life in finance can give them the kind of stimulation. Gambling behavior, by the way, is almost like a drug addiction in a sense, that people who are depressed may go to a gambling casino as a way of getting themselves out of the depression. And they say that when they walk into the casino, suddenly my troubles are gone. I feel invigorated and alive. It almost like it creates a hormonal difference in them that they seek, and it's almost like injecting yourself with something. So it's a very hard thing to conquer. I mentioned before how when the New York State in 1811 created the first corporate law that produced a lot of questionable companies, people then said, this is just gambling. It's bad. But the other side of it is that the same gambling behavior, it's not usually a pathology. It's an aspect of human sensation-seeking, of various aspects of our psychology that drive us. What the stock market is, in some sense, is a way of channeling this kind of behavior into something productive instead of just a game. And so they make it very clear in the stock markets of the world, this is about business and this is productive. The same emotional patterns that created gambling behavior as a human universal underlie this is not abnormal, it's most people, underlie traits that work out well. Okay, the next major thing I wanted to talk about is overconfidence. And psychologists have found that there's a human tendency to overestimate one's own abilities. Okay, we all think, not all of us, most of us think we're above average. Some of us think we're way above average. And this tendency has been revealed in a number of experiments. I thought I would try one on you. I don't know if it will work. I'll try it on this class. If you will participate in this experiment by a show of hands, I'm going to ask you, I have 3 questions here, and I want to ask you to write down a 90% confidence interval. All right? Okay, you have a pencil to write this down. And then afterwards I'm going to tell you the answer and see if it fell in your confidence interval. Okay, so this is what it is. What is a 90% confidence interval? It's a range of values so that you are 90% sure that the true value lies in this range. Okay, so if I asked you for what is the population of New Haven, you might say 90% confidence interval, that's between 50,000 and 150,000. That means you're 90% sure that the population falls in that range. And so you should be right 90% of the time. That if I ask you to give 90% confidence intervals, you should be right 9 times out of 10. If I ask for a 99% confidence interval, you have to widen the interval, then you should be right 99 times out of 100. So what I'm going to ask you to do, if you will cooperate with me, is give 90% confidence intervals for, I have 3 questions I'm going to give you. But I have to ask you to be honest, otherwise this thing won't work. You could game me by just giving excessively wide confidence intervals, right? And then, from 0 to infinity, then you'll always be right. But you're not playing honestly. So I have to appeal to your character to do this honestly, okay? So I have 3 questions here. I just changed the questions. The first is, now what you have to write down on your note paper somewhere is your honest estimate of a 90% confidence interval. And so the first question is the world population. How many people are alive in the world? All right. As of, I think it was 8 a.m. this morning, the U.S. Census has something called the World Population Clock. And don't cheat. I know some of you have laptops. Don't do it. But after this, you can search Google on World Population Clock, and it shows you minute by minute how many people there are in the world, every birth and death. They're not actually recording them, it's a fake, but I mean, it's supposed to be an estimate. So I got the world population. So what I want you to do, can you write down a lower bound and an upper bound for the world population this morning, as measured by the U.S. Census? Okay, can you write that down? But I don't want you to make it too wide. Remember, I only want you to be 90% sure. And I don't want you to make it too narrow, because then you're more likely to fail. So you've written that down, the world population? Okay, my next question is to the world. What does it weigh? Okay. Well, actually, it's the mass in kilograms of the world. Can you write that down? This is astronomy. Okay, let me say, I'm asking for it in kilograms, but you can do it in metric tons. That just knocks off 3 zeros. A metric ton is 1,000 kilograms, okay? And just so you'll know for sure, that's not the same thing as a long ton, which is UK. The United Kingdom uses the long ton, which is 2,240 pounds. I just looked this up, and is 1.1 metric tons. And it's not exactly the same as a short ton, which we use in the United States, which is 2,000 pounds, which is 0.98 metric tons. All right? Just tell me how many tons. That's not going to affect your 90% confidence interval, right? Just tell me how many tons does the Earth weigh? Okay? All right. And then that's the second. And I have one more question. How many languages are there in the world? Okay. Now, I know, because you might complain, this is a matter of definition, because sometimes 2 dialects might be considered a separate language. Well, I'm asking you to give me the number. The World Authority on Languages is an organization that has a website called ethnologue.com. And if you go to that website, they're always discovering new language. They keep track of it. New languages keep getting discovered because, some guy is hiking out in Siberia, and they go to this little village and say, hey, these people are speaking a a language that would never been documented before. So it's this process of learning languages. They also keep dying out because they're just elderly people in this village, and when they die, you know this language is going to die with them. So anyway, the question is, I want your 90% confidence interval for the number of languages as defined by ethnologue.com. Okay, you have to guess how they define a language. But you have an idea more or less what a language is, right? It's more than a dialect because they can still understand each other if they speak different dialects. We're talking about really different languages. Okay, have you written down 3 confidence intervals? Okay, so I'm going to write down the answers, and I hope this works. I'm trusting to your honesty in getting these things because you could game me and make this not work. But give me your honest So I'm going to write down the correct answer. So the world population, as of 8 a.m. this morning, was 6,901,330,581. Okay. Now, can I get a show of hands? How many people's confidence interval includes that number? Okay, does someone tell me what percent that is? That is not 90%. You're doing pretty well, though. What do you think, Oliver? You think it's 80? See him up again. Maybe it is 80. All right, you're doing really well. Some honest people here didn't put their hands up. Good. All right, well, that's one. So we did 80 instead of 90. What about the weight of the Earth? Okay, in kilograms. Well, it's 5.974 times 10 to the 24th power. And I'll give you that in tons, in more familiar. It's 5,974 billion tons. Okay. You got that? You might have to do some calculation. That would be 5.9734 times 10 to the 18th power. Okay, can we do a show of how many people had a number in, how many people are in the confidence interval there? All right, Oliver, what do you think? What's the fraction? 10%. Okay, so this one, you did really well on world population. 80, 10. Well, the last one, how many languages are in the world? Well, according to ethnologue.com, there are 6,909 languages this morning. Okay, how many people got that within their confidence interval? Okay, what do you think, Oliver? 10%, okay. Why did you do so much better on world population? Well, thank you for being honest with me. I think it worked once again, the overconfident. So why is it that people are overconfident like this? And psychologists have tried to describe what it is that goes on in people's minds that produces answers like this. One of them is that people seem to have a sense that they understand the world more than they really do. It's an illusion. Actually, the world is just infinitely complicated, and there are so many surprises. You have when you think about a question like this, there's many different perspectives that you can take. And if you thought more about it, your imagination might help you to widen your confidence interval. But you can't think of all the perspectives at once. And so you tend to gravitate to the first one that comes to mind, and it gives you an underestimate of the confidence of the. That is overconfidence. By the way, I think it's a little bit higher in males than females. I didn't do a separate male-female count, but females are definitely overconfident. There's a so-called macho personality that's supremely overconfident, that's not in DSM-4, but I don't think it is, but it is more common among males. But it's really everyone is overconfident, so it's not, there's no important sex difference here. Incidentally, I think that overconfidence, and this is an important phenomenon, it goes beyond yourself it extends to your friends. And you exaggerate. There's a tendency for people to think that I have very smart friends, okay? I was reflecting the other day, when I was an undergraduate at University of Michigan, I was in the honors program, and we thought we were pretty smart. And I had a number of young people that I just imagined were heading toward careers, really great careers. There was one student that we called Young Jack Kennedy, because, this was some years ago. Jack Kennedy was president of the United States. We thought he was a genius. That was probably wrong too, right? None of these people are geniuses. I was thinking that most of my friends ended up in very, good careers, but nothing that you would think was spectacular. I had one friend as an undergrad who I thought was a genius, and his name was Bruce Wasserstein. Anyone ever heard of him? Maybe not. Well, see, that's it. But he founded his own investment bank called Wasserstein Perella, became really rich, and then he bought interest in Lazard Frères, the French investment bank. And he was a real big shot on Wall Street. I met him again about 10 years ago. And then he died. God, he had a heart attack and died. So I know his whole life. I saw him when he was 18. And I've watched his whole life, and it's now history. It's kind of scary. But I remember thinking he was a genius as an undergrad. But I was wondering, what was wrong with my judgment? Why did I see so many other geniuses? And he maybe... I thought now that I think back on it, he had a sort of real-world common sense that amazed me. He just knew things that... It wasn't fake knowledge. He seemed to know how things worked. So I guess I was right about one of them. But not enough that none of you have heard of him, right? Anyway, he has an investment bank named after him, right? You should have heard of him, but maybe not. But anyway, this thing affects people's thinking too. I think that we tend to think that the head of state who's running, the head of our central bank is a genius. And this really clouds our thinking. It's not just confident. It's like our ego extends to the other people that we associate with ourselves. Now, the head of a central bank in another country we have no respect for. It's only in our own country, because it's part of our ego involvement that produces this overconfidence. So this produces this tendency for overconfidence produces a lot of anomalies and opportunities for manipulation. So, for example, Rakesh Khurana, who is a professor at the Harvard Business School, has written a book called Search for the Charismatic CEO. And he claims that there's a tendency for people to think that CEOs are geniuses, or that at least the one that we found is a genius. And companies then seek out a genius CEO to put in charge of the company as a kind of manipulation of the stock market. They think if we got some guy who's run other companies successfully in the past, he must be a genius. Put him in our company, our stock price will go up. Then we can sell our we can exercise our options and make a lot of money by putting in this fake genius. And Khurana says, well, there are some people who are maybe geniuses at management, but most of the time they're just lucky. And we tend to develop overconfidence. And then what happens, according to Khurana, is you put in some guy who turned around some company spectacularly, supposedly. You bring him in to run a new company, and he doesn't know anything about this new company, right? But he has to justify himself. So he lays off a lot of people and shuffles things around and just destroys everything in the company and ruins things. This is related to another author that I recommend. I mentioned him before, I think. Nassim Taleb wrote a book called Fooled by Randomness that he's Lebanese, but now in the U.S. Nassim Taleb, Fooled by Randomness. that says that most of the things that happen in life are just chance. And we tend to ascribe them. If they happen to us, we're very quick to conclude that it's a sign of our own genius. And if it happens to someone that is a friend of us, then you think, well, I have genius friends. Isn't that nice? And so it leads to mistakes.